Well, we've got some interesting data showing that only 36% of voters positively rate the performance of the Albanese government, down from 46% in April. The drop in support coincides with heightened expectations of another interest rate hike, with almost half of Australians polled predicting interest rates are going to rise again at the RBA's next meeting next week, with only 26% expecting interest rates to be lower in a year's time. Joining me now is Sky News Political Editor Andrew Clennell. Andrew, we've got a lot to discuss. Support for the government is clearly falling as the economy falters. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister's primary concern appears to be the voice proposal and slashing emissions. Tell me, what will a referendum defeat do to the PM's fortunes?
Well, I don't think it'll help him at all. And I think it's telling that Tony Burke's at the press club talking about his IR reforms to introduce into Parliament next week, just one day after they launch the referendum date. So I think they're keen to show we're getting on with other things other than the voice. And they have some cost of living challenges, but they improved a little with these inflation figures today, showing the lowest month-on-month inflation since February 2022. They needed them badly. That means probably no rate rise next week. The Newgate survey you're talking about, thought 1 in 2 thought there'd be another rate rise next week, next month. Why wouldn't you, given there's been something like 12 in 14 months or 15 months? So the government's hope will be that inflation comes down, but that the economy doesn't collapse, that interest rates, the Reserve Bank's in a position to actually start to drop them by the time an election rolls around in 2025. That will be their fervent hope. And if they go down in the voice referendum, which according to the polls looks pretty likely, despite the fact 100 million will be spent on it, then their hope will be that will be a distant memory by the time the next election rolls around.
Now, on those inflation numbers, CPI has fallen from 5.4% to 4.9%. I certainly didn't seem that way when I did the weekly shop last night. Was that drop in line with market expectations? Is this something that we should be rejoicing about?
I think rejoicing slightly. I wouldn't be celebrating because prices, as you've just pointed out, have gone up so high anyway. We're all really copying it. But in terms of a rate rise, absolutely, because I can't see after this an interest rate rise, and you know, a lot of businesses, a lot of mortgage holders wouldn't have been able to cope with an extra one. The fervent hope now is there isn't another rise in this cycle. It's Philip Lowe, the Reserve Bank Governor's last meeting as governor next week, so Michelle Bullock might be right time, right place.
Well, we're going to be talking about her and her prediction that climate change is going to be a factor in the decisions she makes about rates. So that's going to be exciting new development. Now, on Richard Marles, he's been known to bang on about climate change, but news.com.au's reported that the Deputy Prime Minister is booking military planes to pick him up and drop him off at Avalon Airport, closer to his home in Geelong, saving himself the approximately 1 hour car ride from Melbourne Airport, Tullamarine. Does this pass the pub test, Andrew?
Well, we had Kerry Chikarovsky on yesterday saying she's hearing it from cab drivers, so I'd say not. The only excuse that Richard Marles has, which is probably fair enough, although if you cast an eye on every single flight, I'm sure you could pick up some exceptions to this rule, is that Anthony Albanese's been out of the country a lot. He's entitled to the VIP. Richard Marles has been acting Prime Minister for all those weeks. So I'm sure some of the flights fall across that. But this has crept up on the government, this issue of flights and so forth. On the one hand, you've got these stories about the flights of Albanese and Marles and the cost to the taxpayer. On the other hand, you've got these revelations that they knock back Qatar Airways from 28 more flights a week into Australia, which comes at a time when airfares, international airfares, are way up on where they were pre-COVID. So it feeds into that cost of living dilemma for Australians, into that belief that politicians don't sort of get it. And that's always dangerous ground. I mean, you know, I caught Anthony Albanese out in the petrol price the other week. He doesn't have to catch these commercial
yes.
flights. They just need to be careful, the government, that they, you can have Jim Chalmers out there as much as you like, Rita, saying, I understand the cost of living pain, I get it. He might more than the Deputy or the PM. They need to make sure that they do get it. They do look out the window at the petrol price and they realise what's going on out there, or they could get a rude shock.
Well, they fly at the pointy end of the plane, the ones who actually take commercial flights and don't have military jets dropping them off at Avalon. They have the chairman's lounge. They're completely removed from the experience the average air traveller has, and we are paying way too much for flights in this country, and Qantas's oligopoly is protected by the government. It is just wrong. Before I let you go, speculation is mounting over the future of Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk. As she enjoys a holiday in Italy with her boyfriend, there is a criticism that the Premier has spent more time on annual leave this year than she has days in Parliament. Is she going to face a challenge, Andrew?
I don't believe she will, but I think she's paying for her holiday in terms of media scrutiny. I don't think she's having a very relaxing first few days of the holiday. I've seen the Courier Mail front page. This is often what happens when premiers go overseas, or, Scott Morrison during bushfires went to Hawaii. I don't think it's at that level yet, but there has been some conjecture for a while that Palaszczuk might stand down or, be persuaded to stand down so there's a fresh leader in time for an election. Labor's in danger of losing. I don't think she'd be challenged. I think the only way Palaszczuk would go before that election is if she did decide to retire. But the fact there's talk around does not help her at all, and it shows division in the government. It's manna from heaven for David Christofouli. If the Liberal parties or the LNP, in fact, are going to get back anywhere in the next few years, frankly, it's going to be Queensland. So it's a big election for the LNP, and
Yes.
Labor are up against it. They're not out of it, according to the polls, but they're up against it, and that means when the Premier holidays in Europe, and she's been telling people to holiday in Queensland, it's not ideal for the government, a very long-term government at that.
Well, yes, I would have thought Queensland holiday hotspots were for Queensland people and she could holiday in them instead of being in idyllic spots in Italy. Andrew Clennell, thank you so much for your time this evening.